Hi, everybody. Michael Silber here, Event Director for Enlit Australia. Continuing with our series of interviews with industry leaders on developments in the Australian energy industry and the energy transition. Today, we're very fortunate to have with us Dr. Patrick Hartley. He's the leader of CSIRO's Hydrogen Industry Mission. In this role, he is responsible for developing strategy and partnerships for a major new national research initiative to be launched in mid-2020, which is focused on delivering research, development, and demonstration projects which enable the scale-up of Australia's domestic and export hydrogen industries. He holds a PhD in chemical engineering from Imperial College London, and he has been with CSIRO since 1998, where he has led applied research projects and programs in the material, biomedical, and energy areas. Welcome, Patrick.
Nice to be with you, Michael. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for joining us today. I'd like to begin this discussion with where there's lots to talk about the hydrogen industry and where hydrogen is going. And often it's difficult to separate fact from fiction. But what is the general consensus on where hydrogen will have the greatest impact in Australia?
Yeah, okay. Well, it's a good question, and there are a number of different answers. I suppose you can actually measure impact in different ways. So I guess most people, when they think about impact, they think about economic benefits. So that's probably the place I'll start. And really looking at economic impact, it's hard to go past the potential scale of a clean energy export industry. The ability to move clean energy around the world would be a real game changer globally, and is a huge opportunity for Australia. So I would think that was probably the greatest potential impact, but that's an international impact. Another impact, of course, the reason people are really pursuing hydrogen is the potential to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So if you're looking at that as an impact metric, you have to look at more domestic applications for hydrogen, and where it can really replace fossil fuels in a domestic setting. And so the front runners here for hydrogen really are in transportation, which is around about 19% of Australia's emissions, and also using it as a zero emissions alternative to things like natural gas in stationary energy applications, other than the electricity sector, where it can also play a role. So there's a number of different answers, but probably the really big economic prize is the export industry, which Australia could really build.
So yeah, that's an interesting point. And the conversation seems to have shifted from one of technology to one of market activation. Do you see what are the barriers that you see for the continued development of the hydrogen industry here in Australia?
Yeah, sure, absolutely, and you're right to make the statement. I'll give a quick plug to the National Hydrogen Roadmap, which CSIRO delivered in 2018, and we really identified that market activation as a key challenge to the industry development. And so I think achieving that market activation really requires scale up, and it's scale up in demand and scale up in production of hydrogen, and of course both of those are completely interlinked. So we feel that developing hydrogen utilization industries will be the way to make hydrogen truly become mainstream, and that can be both stimulating existing industries, but also the development of new industries which can really embrace its use. So I think scale up is the key challenge, and that's going to require sustained capital and effort and time to develop. So we're on the journey right now.
Following that, are there any examples in other parts of the world where scale up has begun or it's been successful to this point?
Yeah, it's broadly speaking, the technology is kind of at the same scale everywhere in the world. People are really moving now from demonstration projects where they're looking at how hydrogen can be integrating it into existing systems like the natural gas network. So there's a number of projects which are really doing those large-scale feasibility studies, let's say, but the real rollout of large-scale hydrogen industries is taking time. Probably some of the biggest examples are what's going on in Southeast Asia, in places like Japan and South Korea, where things like the vehicle manufacturing companies are really putting a lot of emphasis in building markets for hydrogen vehicles, which they're now producing at a reasonable scale. And both of those countries are really promoting that as an industry which they want to build. So it's on the journey, but there's a way to go yet, everywhere in the world, really.
You mentioned the Asian market and their use of hydrogen. Dr. Finkel, of course, speaks often about creating a hydrogen export market here in Australia. Do you foresee an export market developing much the way LNG developed here?
Yeah, I mean, I think as I mentioned before, this is really a big opportunity for Australia. It's an opportunity to harness the huge clean energy potential we have in renewable energy, in low emissions fossil energy, and to really develop a game-changing clean energy export trade. And I think there is a lot to learn from the development of the LNG industry. So there are many features of the LNG industry and the development of that industry which actually directly map across to hydrogen as an industry. So things like the proximity to our markets in Southeast Asia, as we mentioned, the existing trade relationships with many of those countries, and also just experience in developing those large-scale energy projects is something that we've obviously done in Australia. But it is important to note that building an industry like this at scale is going to take time. It's going to take investment, just like it did for the LNG industry. And we're only just at the beginning. So it's probably a 10-year plus journey to get to that real large-scale industry in hydrogen, which is exactly the experience that LNG has.
Okay, yeah, I was involved with as a media person as the LNG market really began, and the big projects were developed here in this country. So it was quite fascinating to watch. I'm interested, and I think I read in your report, the CSIRO report, about sector coupling. Can you elaborate on what that term means?
Sure, absolutely. So I'll start by it's maybe an unfamiliar term to some people, so I might just talk about what it is and then how it works for hydrogen. So hydrogen, I think I've mentioned already, hydrogen can be obviously used in many different sectors. So it can be used in transport for vehicles, as I was talking about. It can be used in heating, both industrially and domestically. It can be used in electricity production and grid management, and as an industrial feedstock, actually, as a chemical as well. So it's a commodity which can be exported, as we spoke about. So these diversity of applications really opens up new opportunities to connect these different sectors in new ways, and that's really what's meant by sector coupling. So you can use hydrogen as the linking element between all of these different industry sectors, which are very important to our energy system and our emissions, of course. So in terms of optimizing renewable energy, for instance, from production and utilization, you can produce hydrogen using renewable electricity at times of excess renewable energy production, when the sun's shining very brightly or the wind's blowing very hard, and you can actually store the energy in that way. So you can use hydrogen as the vector to smooth out some of the intermittencies in the electricity production from renewable sources, and then you can consume it to produce electricity using fuel cells at other times when you need to back up the electricity system more. And so that's just an example of how you can use hydrogen as a flexible load to smooth out some of those electricity system issues. And then, of course, you can also use the hydrogen that you produce in those systems for transportation at times when you have an excess of the hydrogen that you produce, and in all those other energy sector systems that I mentioned around heating, etc. So it's quite a versatile energy carrier, and so you can really start to look at that sort of networking of hydrogen in those systems, and that's really what sector coupling is about.
Okay, thanks. So I think my final question, I think you just answered, and maybe you can elaborate a little bit more on this. What are the biggest opportunities for hydrogen in the electricity sector, since our audience is primarily the electricity market?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and I think I guess our national roadmap looked at this issue in some detail, and really the approach we took in that roadmap was to look at the incumbent fuels, the incumbent energy sources, and see where hydrogen could really start to displace those incumbent energy systems. And because hydrogen still is a little more expensive than many of those existing energy sources at the moment, you have to look to where those prices are higher in order to know where hydrogen can play a role. So in transportation, where hydrogen is displacing an expensive fuel like petrol, then that's where some of the early applications can be. But in the electricity sector, you really look to where electricity generation is also requiring those expensive fuels like diesel. So it's in diesel, displacing diesel power systems is probably where hydrogen can play the most immediate role, because the prices of electricity production from those materials is slightly higher. And in particular, I think the biggest opportunity there, which we've looked at and are actually developing opportunities in right now, is in remote area power systems. And so you can start to use hydrogen both locally. You can generate it locally from renewable energy, and you can start using that to power your vehicle fleets in remote environments. So I think that opportunity in the electricity sector is in those diesel-powered areas, particularly remote area power systems. That said, in large-scale power generation, many companies in here and overseas are looking at turbines which run on hydrogen, either at 100% hydrogen turbines or mixed with natural gas. So I think those sorts of applications will come online for large-scale electricity generation as well. But at the moment, the price point is slightly higher, so you need to look at those slightly higher electricity cost systems.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by the possibilities of hydrogen driving turbines and large-scale electricity generation. We'll have to keep an eye on that and see how that develops. Well, Dr. Patrick Hartley, thank you very much for your time today. Hopefully we'll see you at our conference in March of next year, March 10th and 11th in Melbourne. And we'll talk to you soon.
Look forward to it. Thanks, Michael.